Coming off as something of a late afflicted member of the sequelitis that dominated gaming in 2011, Final Fantasy XIII-2, the direct sequel to 2010's sharply polarising Final Fantasy XIII, finds itself assuming the role of an introductory centrepiece to the high level of quality releases heading our way throughout 2012. With the weight of a passionate army of fans clamouring for every new slice of the Final Fantasy pie, the expectations are irrefutably massive, and with that pressure at the forefront of their minds, Square Enix have avowed to take fan service into account to rectify misgivings of the past. Does this time-trudging installment in the illustrious franchise firmly begin to take its wares into the future, or has too little too late cast it into the void?
The world is falling apart. I know my sister is alive out there.
Directly leading off from preventing the cataclysmic events that bookended Final Fantasy XIII, Lightning, the stoic heroine from the first game, has disappeared from the face of the earth, and though everyone assumes her dead, she takes up the mantle of a protectorate of Valhalla, a kingdom situated at the crossroads of time and space that comes under siege by Caius, a mysterious figure who desires nothing but the downfall of all life in the universe. Acting in dire circumstances, Lightning bestows her sister Sarah with time-traversing powers and dispatches Noel Chryse, a warrior from a desolate future, and Mog, a fantastical creature with time-bending abilities, to ride shotgun. The trio are assigned to locate fragmentary objects known as artifacts, which unlock specific points in time where they need to correct time paradoxes, self-contained events in the timeline that shouldn't exist and are essentially poisoning the intended destiny of humankind. Along every step of the way, Caius proves himself as a formidable roadblock that impedes their progress as Sarah and Noel delve headfirst into the hidden motivations behind the true evil that seeks to eradicate life in the universe. The story driving XIII-2 isn't meant to be insightful, and it often misses opportunities to be clever. Needless to say, they're not detrimental to your enjoyment of the game or the overall story, that while overstuffed with tedious exposition and schmaltzy moments, can comfortably rest as one of the more striking entries in the series. Yes, the story is convoluted, but what Final Fantasy game isn't? And anyone who's familiar with the basics of standard JRPG fare shouldn't be shocked to know what to expect. It's essentially the story of two sisters who yearn to be reunited, and when the game isn't bombarding you with cheesy moments, plot inconsistencies, and questionable narrative choices, it's strong enough to anchor everything that's going on. Several characters from the previous game also reappear, but in unplayable form, only having extended roles in the story or being relegated to cameos. The game also does admirably at accommodating those who haven't played the first game, with smartly placed tutorials and escalating progression throughout the first quarter of the game, but the minor details between character relationships and terminological buzzwords such as foul C will reduce you to head scratching. This is mitigated somewhat by data log entries that will bring you up to date with these facts, but they're trivial if you don't understand the significance they play in the prior game's story universe. The elements here may not all perfectly fit together like we may have hoped, but they serve as an intelligible enough framework for everything else the game has to offer.
As well. So what do you think? Will you search for the answers with me?
Time for me to go. I don't know what's waiting out there in the future between worlds.
With the linearity of Final Fantasy XIII still fresh in the minds of gamers, it isn't difficult to approach this sequel with a great deal of apprehension considering the fundamental changes that game made to the series formula. Final Fantasy XIII-2 seemingly carries over the same cosmetic and mechanical layout of its predecessor, but the fear of deja vu is quelled within the first few hours once you delve into what new the game has brought to the table. The most glaring change up to the formula is the Historia Crux, acting as a hub world of sorts showing all the possible timelines that can be explored. This allows for greater latitude in tackling the main quest, using the Historia Crux at your own leisure to traverse between the timelines at your own pace. Though the game places a heavy focus on rectifying paradoxical consequences throughout the multiple timelines, there are also sequences in which you solve anomalies, a series of thankless mini board game puzzles acting as a means of resolving negative crimps in a timeline that need to be restored. Considering how infrequent they are in the grand scheme of the game, they come across as a bit arbitrary. Another overdue addition to the series are the dialogue trees, which allow for a more personalised touch in how you want to approach conversations. Although you're ultimately led to one overall answer when it comes to key story points, it's nice to see it in action during impromptu conversations between characters in the main quest. Also benefiting from minor tweaks is the menu interface, which allows you to now optimize party members to perform at the best of their ability without you having to toil over what equipment they should be assigned, and 3D models of characters in your party. Also a victim of simplification is the Crystarium system, with all class abilities being combined into one overall branching path that gives players freedom to upgrade their roles at their own choosing. A welcome return is the Paradigm Shift battle system, pioneered in Final Fantasy XIII that remains the crux of the game, and arguably stands as the most strategic and rewarding system in the franchise. Refined rather than redefined, the setup flows more seamlessly thanks to the removal of clumsy animations when switching up paradigms, as well as having the ability to switch party leaders mid-combat if one of them peters out. The option to retry battles mid-combat further sweetens the user-friendly approach of its predecessor that vexed longtime fans of the series in the first place, but it's implemented into 13-2 in an unintrusive manner, being an option rather than a requirement to emerge victorious. Also returning is the ability to earn gil after each battle, a perk inconceivably absent from the previous game that will ultimately go a long way to aid in your pursuit of acquiring exorbitantly priced weapons and items the series is known for housing. It can be an unyielding slog for those who struggle to come to grips with it, but when you spend enough time to master its intricacies, it's hard not to feel exhilarated by the way the paradigm system operates. Introduced into 13-2 are paradigm packs, allowing you freedom to capture the crystals of monsters you defeat across the time-space continuum and incorporate them into your party paradigms. Each monster has a preset class to work with, and the concept itself serves as an enjoyable variation on what is essentially the same as having 3 party members like in the previous game. These monsters can also be upgraded through sacrificing other captured monsters and infusing their powers into your preferred critter, or through the Crystarium system by collecting specifically tailored items in the world or buying them at Chocolina's shop. They can also activate special attacks known as Feral Link abilities after accumulating enough power during combat that can act as much needed support in tight situations, dependent on what role they play in your paradigm. Though there are plenty of monsters to be found, it's unlikely that you'll assemble a large arsenal of monsters that you'll interchange frequently, opting to stick with only a couple that you've acquired and upgraded at different points of the game. The story's paradoxical happenings also minister as the springboard for random enemy encounters throughout the multiple timelines. The new mod clock functionality allows for preemptive strikes, which if done capably, will award your party members with haste to get a drop on enemies quickly during combat, ultimately leading to fast victories and earning higher star ratings and rare item drops. Fail to do so before the clock runs out, and you're forced to confront foes without the option to retry if you fail to beat them. Adding to the frenetic pace of the major boss encounters are cinematic actions, a series of quick-time events that can be actioned through specific button prompts that lead to special rewards if you time it all perfectly. Though players may be able to clinch the zenith of the main story between 20 to 25 hours, Final Fantasy XIII-2 is far and away the more jam-packed of the two games. The game encourages players to entertain branching paths through critical choices that can go a long way to tweaking your progression. Perhaps the biggest advocate of the game's free-roaming ethos, the Historia Crux can also be used to go back to previous timelines and alter their events in self-contained sequences. If you're unsatisfied with whatever feats you've accomplished in a certain timeline, the game does a great job of allowing you to reset level events through closing and reopening its time gate to subsequently retry your hand at eking out all possible objectives to entertain different outcomes. While all this can easily fall into the trap of repetitive backtracking, the incentives on hand to find everything available keep you driven to replay multiple areas, though some may find themselves more enamored with certain locations and leaving others in the dust. The option to explore the world as either party member carries over from 13, being interchangeable at any time unless the story requires it, and the ability to save anywhere in the world alleviates the pressure of refraining to explore certain paths merely to bypass the risk of losing your current progress. Huge plaudits also go to being able to return to the Historia Crux from anywhere in the world via the start menu to go between multiple timelines, and restart from the exact spot you were when you left upon return. Creature comfort also edges its way into the exploring aspect of 13-2, with the companionate Mog accompanying your journey while at the same time revealing hidden treasures obscured by alternate timelines, as well as being the butt of a few jokes. The franchise's proverbial chocobos also make an impactful return, it being available to ride across the various locations while at the same time performing the task of preventing random enemy encounters. Chocobos can also be encountered in the wild and when defeated are able to be incorporated into your party paradigms, serving as a nice inclusion for longtime fans, and when trained up can prove to be indispensable in your success in battle. Final Fantasy XIII-2's smorgasbord of locations exhaust all colours and architectural styles. Some of these include town ruins, mechanical settlements, high-tech cities, and even saturated patches of forest, while the phantasmagorical theme park-like casino known as Serendipity embraces the older game's traditions of sinking your time into fun distractions like slot machines and entering your own chocobos in racing sprints, with all activities earning you coins that can be exchanged for prizes and special items. With a hefty expanse of open world options, time-travelling action, or just indulging in some serendipitous frivolity, Final Fantasy XIII-2 will surely prove to have decent longevity in your console.
But must we accept this, Yule?
Not to use the portal. Your time-gazing friend should have told you how it works.
There's no denying that Final Fantasy XIII-2 packs some considerable clout in the polygon department. Character modelling and facial animation are exquisite, and the all-around accomplished voice acting complement its artistry even further, and the same can be said for the game's pre-rendered cinematics, which stand as some of the best looking in the genre. Apart from timelines that are different years of the same world, the locations in XIII-2 never feel like rehashes of previous or later levels, each possessing environmental variety in accord with the nature of their place in the time-space continuum, but they're not without their fair share of rough edges and frame rate slowdown every now and again. While whilst the camera could benefit from some minor tweaks. Though these hiccups never render them as being displeasing to the eye, the same can't necessarily be said for its inhabitants. You can talk to these citizens throughout the timelines, and while some of them offer up errands, most of them merely act as dressing for the vibrantly modelled environments, spouting nothing but inane babble or out-of-context statements that make them feel like an unnecessary inclusion. Thankfully, the countless number of monsters are the complete opposite, and have enough personality and idiosyncratic design to set them apart from each other. The music in XIII-2 is also quite diverse, with much on offer, varying between gentle samples of piano medleys and orchestral bravado, but will also at times shift to fast-paced beats, treacly pop ditties, and even unbridled bursts of death metal. It's an odd mix on the surface, and while some choices may appear to be anachronistic for the visual tone of the game, they serve their purpose just fine. All of the elements in XIII-2 come together to create a cohesive game world, and though it lacks the obsessive attention to detail of its predecessor, it's a step forward in the right direction for the series in keeping players engrossed in its mythos.
If I believe, maybe a miracle will happen.
This is what you wanted to see, wasn't it?
Final Fantasy XIII-2 may retain the series' over-enthusiasm for the grandiose, but it excellently refines majority of the elements from the previous game, while simultaneously incorporating some much-needed variety in a series becoming outclassed by other games it's influenced. The changes on the whole are minimal, but their effect on the game's polish and enjoyment is substantial, and what its predecessor lacked in modesty, the sequel more than makes up for with wiser game design and smartly implemented freedom of choice, be it through diverging story paths, light-hearted side quests, or just marauding about its fanciful world. It may not prove to be the gigantic leap we're all expecting from the franchise, with some abundant issues carrying over from 13, and it will undoubtedly continue to polarize the fan community. But when it comes to bang for your buck and walking away with a sense of having played a worthwhile gaming experience, Final Fantasy XIII-2 successfully achieves its goal, and bodes as a positive indication of what we can expect from the future of the series. If you've got any kind of piquing interest at what you see here, it's highly recommended gaming. For more in-depth discussions on Final Fantasy XIII-2, be sure to check out episode 10 of the Dark Podcast. Also, to keep in the loop with what's happening on our channel and what videos we're working on, be sure to join us on Facebook and Twitter by clicking the links in the video or in the description. Also, if you really enjoyed the review, hit that like button, and if you feel the need to subscribe for reviews, podcasts, let's plays, and plenty more great upcoming stuff, by all means go for it, we'll love you. Thanks for watching guys, and we hope to catch you next time.